we discussed, when you suggested, Doug, to do this, I was talking over with Jeannie Henry, and I said, I can't believe that my life would have been sufficiently interesting to do a tape on. And she said, your life has been so interesting, she said, and you tell so many stories about so many events, starting from the time you and your brother ran away from home up until the present time. She said, you could talk for 10 hours and tell those stories. And I said, well, I don't know. If I do, I don't know what to dwell on. I could dwell on some incredible stories in the Air Force. When we were in the Air Force, you go to 3 different schools. You go to primary, primary, basic, and advanced. I took my primary training at Oxnard, California. That's where we were flying open cockpits, twin wings, biplanes, PT-13s, 14s, 15s, and so forth. Then we went to basic, and we're flying BT, which are basic trainers, and they have a closed canopy, and you start getting into the kind of an airplane that you're ultimately going to be flying when you're in the Air Force. And I'm coming in, and your instructor sits in the back seat, you're sitting in the front seat. And one of the things that they're always alerting you for is making a forced landing, making an emergency landing. So anytime you're doing anything, you've got to constantly keep in your mind, I've got to watch a spot to come down in, because he can cut the engine here at any time. And then all of a sudden, he shuts the throttle off, and your engine's not running, and you got to suddenly look for a place to land, see? And you circle around with a dead engine, and you finally find a field and win. So we're going into this one field, and I had made a big mistake. I had dropped the landing gear, and I'm coming in over this rail fence, and I'm too low, and I take the landing gear off the airplane. Now, I knew when the landing gear went off because I could feel the big yank, and we almost nosed in, but I gunned it at the same time, and we went up in the air. And the pilot says, the teacher says, I guess you know what happened. And I said, I think I do. Well, he said, look back on that fence. I looked back on the fence, and there were my wheels hanging on the damn fence. And he said, what are you going to do? And I said, well, I guess you're going to belly land when we get back to Moffett Field. And he said, I guess so. He said, you know, I could wash you out for this. And I said, I knew you could. And if I were you, I would probably do it. He said, I don't know. He said, we're going to talk it over when we get in. So he comes in and he belly lands, and of course the plane spins around and busts the propeller off and so forth. And we wrecked, I was going to say many, we wrecked numerous airplanes at Moffett Field. That's where we really started wrecking planes. Moffett Field had the biggest dirigible hangar in the world. That dirigible hangar was so large, now get this, clouds would form inside of this huge building, and it would rain in there, and it would be clear outside. That's how big that thing was. The doors were open on a railroad. They had train engines, chugging along, opening the doors on this thing. But what they would do whenever an airplane was wrecked, and we had guys who were killed, of course, but they'd get the wreckage and they bring them in and put them in a pile in one corner of this hangar. When you marched out to your airplane, you had to march through this hangar, and the first thing you saw as you walked through this hangar was this big pile of bloody airplane parts sticking over there. So, I mean, it got into your brain.
Where was that?
Stay alive. Moffett Field, California. That was the dirigible center originally of the Navy. They had, at one time, the dirigibles were a very important part of the Navy because they were used for anti-submarine work. I mean, they'd float them out over the ocean, watch for periscopes and so forth, plus the fact that they were relatively silent. And they were very, until that, the Graf Spee was one of the largest Zeppelins, they called them Zeppelins in Germany, ever built, and it flew across the Atlantic, and they were getting ready to tie up in New York, and somehow or another a spark was created by the landing ropes that were coming in, and that thing blew up. And you may have seen over the years, this is like in 1923 or something like that, that huge dirigible, which was as long as 3 football fields, blew up and crashed, and of course everybody that was on board was killed. But the experiences in the Air Force were great. I met a number of great guys in there. Just, but my Navy experiences, and guys that were in action don't generally like to talk about it, and I don't particularly either, because I've seen guys killed, I've seen guys drowned. But one of the more humorous things is seeing a guy, we were, in destroyers there's a passageway midships that goes from one side of the ship to the other. In other words, if you're standing over here, you can see through this passageway and see clear over on the other side of the ship. And we'd been at general quarters. You go to general quarters when there are enemies, when the enemy is around, and will probably have some shooting to do or something. So we're at general quarters, and I wanted a cup of coffee, and I went down from the bridge down to the galley, which was right where this midship passageway was. And we had black stewards that took care of the officers. They made our bunk, and they brought our food and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, I'm standing in this passageway talking to Moses, or whatever the black guy's name was, while he was giving me a cup of joe, as they call it in the Navy. And I see this Japanese twin-engine bomber, suicide plane, coming at us on the port side of our ship. See, I look over and I said, "Gee," I said, "Look at that baby. That baby's going to hit us." And at this time, it was maybe 2,000 yards out there, coming right straight at us. And of course, the guys were all firing right into it. See, old Moses looks at that airplane, and he said, "Holy blankety blank, blank, blank." And with that, he ran in the opposite direction through the passageway, jumped over the side, because he figured we were going to be killed. So he jumps over the side. I pick up the TBS, which is talk between ships, and I call the bridge. I said, "Man overboard." The captain says, "Who is it?" And I said, "The mess attendant." He said, "We aren't turning around." He said, "We can't turn around now." He said, "Leave him. Somebody else will probably pick him up." And he said, "If he doesn't, as far as I'm concerned, he's AWOL anyway." So 3 months later, we're in some isolated island, and the first thing the Navy always did when we would take an island away from the jet, we built a little officers club, set up a little bar, and get the booze hauled in there. And then we'd come in and tie up the only thing we hit for the officers club. So we go in this officers club, sit down, they got a plank in there with stools around it. We sit down. Who comes up to wait on our table but old Moses? And I said, "Moses, what in the hell are you doing here?" Well, he says, "You guys went off and left me." I said, "You jumped over the side." I said, "How did you get here?" Well, he said, "The ship behind me threw me a line and pulled me on board." And I said, "Well, how come you got on the beach now instead of staying on board the ship?" Well, he said, "They told me I was AWOL from the ship. They wouldn't let me be on ships anymore, so they put me here in this officers club." He said, I'm glad they did. Well, anyway, he started bringing us drinks. And maybe there were probably 6 of us sitting at a table half this side. And for the 3 or 4 hours we were there, that table was full of drinks constantly all the time. He couldn't do enough for it. That's one of the funnier stories. I hurt my back. We were going to general quarters. General quarters bell rings. It goes beep, 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 beep. My station was on the bridge, and I was up on the forecastle, clear up on the front of the ship, with the doctor. We were talking up there, and as the general quarters signal went off, I goosed him as I whirled around to head for the bridge, and the chief's quarters were in the front part of the ship, and they had a huge hatch there that they always secured the minute the general quarters started. But they hadn't secured that hatch, and I whirled around, and down the hatch I went. And the doctor looks around, figured I'm running down the deck going for the bridge, and nobody's there. Gee, like disappearing act, baby. What happened to it? And he hears this, "Oh!" He goes over and looks down the hole, and I had fallen down that hatch. And I mean, it's about half again as deep as this is, and there are a steel ladder going down, and I think my spine hit about every third one of those all the way down, and I'm laying there stretched out. Oh! So he calls the pharmacist mates, and they get a stretcher and take me to sick bay, and he straps me up and so forth. He said, "There's nothing I can do." He said, "You busted up your back a little bit," but he said, "We don't have x-ray or anything." So I put up with that the rest of the time I was in the Navy. And when I was coming out of the Navy, they asked, one of the questions on the thing was, have you suffered any injury or accidents in the Navy? And I'm thinking, yes, I did. I fell down there. But I'm really not, it's not that bad, and I just hesitate to put that down, you know. Fell down a hatch, big deal, man. You're out there fighting a war. You fall down a hatch, and you're complaining about falling down the hatch. So I almost didn't put it down, but I put it down. Fell down the hatch, injured back. Well, that was the smartest thing I ever did as far as getting out was concerned, because ultimately when I was in law school, my back started bothering me, really bothering me. And Pat Brannon was an orthopedic surgeon, and he told me, he said, put up with that thing until your foot starts to drag. So I went to Wilson, Dr. Wilson, who was an orthopedic surgeon in Columbus, and I told him what Pat had said. And he said, he's right. He said, if the foot starts flopping, he said, come and see me. Well, we're at a cocktail party one night out at Charlie Hills. The racetrack guy, he had a beautiful place up on the side of the river. And the doctor was there. He was in the Navy League, and it was a Navy League party. And I'm walking over toward the bar, and I kind of trip on a throw rug that was over there. I got my drink and went back, and he came over to me, and he said, your foot's dropped. And I said, what do you mean? He said, I saw you over there. He said, you hooked your toe on that rug, and it was because your foot is starting to flop. He said, it's time for you to figure out what you're going to do about this back. And I said, well, what do you suggest? And he said, I suggest that we do x-rays, and you send a copy of the x-rays out to Pat, and let him tell us what he thinks. He'll send them back to me, and we'll figure out what we're going to do here. He said, we can do anything here they can do out there. There's no point in you going to California. So we did the x-rays, and they ended up doing a fusion and a laminectomy. They took out one of my joints and fused the other joint to it and so forth. Well, that prepared me for filing a claim with the Navy for disability for this thing. So I filled out the papers and filed this claim with the Navy, and they questioned whether or not it occurred and said I have to have a witness. So I wrote the doctor that I goosed and said, I got to have your signature on. Oh, yeah, I said, I'll write you a letter. And I wrote Fleming and said, I need a letter when, I said, do you remember when I fell down that hatch? And he said, yeah, I remember. I said, write a letter that you were witness to that. And he said, okay. So I sent those two letters in, and they give me 10% disability, which at that time was, I don't know, $50 or something like that, but was very helpful because at that time I didn't have any money, and boy, $50 meant a lot to me. Well, then they kept increasing until now I'm up at 50% disability on it. And it's worth, I get $500 a month for this disability to my back. And that's still part of the same old problem. The reason I had this operation the other day was because of the same area. But they can no longer do another fusion or laminectomy because they've already done that. They've already taken that portion out of my back. And my spine has gotten crooked like that. And the x-rays show that it's shutting off the nerve column, and the backbone is crushing my nerves in there, and that's why I'm having all this severe pain. But the doctor says, geez, you're 89 years old, you've had open heart surgery. He said, we've done everything to your body that can be done, and we just can't go any further at your age. I mean, you're out there at the extreme end. And he said, you're going to have to put up with that back, but we can continue to give you those epidurals, one every 3 or 4 months, and keep you going. So. But anyway, that's the Navy story.
Tell the story about the horse.
What do you think?
All right, go ahead.
When we were making the other parts of these films, I neglected to mention a couple of 3 incidents that I think are rather
He's going to cut
interesting.
this.
All occurred when I was relatively young, probably someplace around between 10 and 12 years old. In the earlier part of my discussion, I talked about the first horse I ever owned, whose name was Hazel. And Hazel was bought at a horse sale in Nebraska, sight unseen, because my dad had heard that there was a pony for sale there, and his friend Jack Berrigan, who was a horse buyer, was told by my dad to buy that pony for my dad's boys, which were King and myself. Jack Berrigan came back from the sale with what would now be called pretty much a quarter horse. It was larger than a pony, but a little bit smaller because it had been a racehorse. And the horse had hit the starting gate at the start of a race and had bruised its hip and had constantly, as a result of this bruised hip, been unable to race and was retired. And Hazel had a number of defects and sold for $10. My dad paid $10 for the horse. One of which was a shoulder that was damaged, and the horse had a funny gait. It was called a Sweeney. And as I explained before, the cure for it was to take a slice in the hide on the shoulder where the bruise was, drop a silver dollar in there, and the silver dollar would work around and bring the growth of the skin from the meat, bring them back so that it would slide back in a normal way, and thus the horse would lose that jerk that it had in its gait. Unfortunately, Hazel never quite lost that little jerk in her gait, which was kind of cute, but you had to be knowledgeable of the situation when you got on her and started to run her because of this funny gait. You could very easily have been thrown off of her as a result of it. But the horse, as a racehorse, had been bred as a racehorse. And actually there was none of the other kids that I ran with, and we all had horses, none of the other kids had a horse that could beat Hazel. Hazel would lay her ears back and just run like hell, and she'd get out in front of the horses and she'd ease back a little and her ears would come up, start to straighten up. She'd hear another horse coming up on either side of her that was challenging her, and she'd lay those ears back, and boy, away she'd go again. And my dad told me one day, it was like in July or August, he said, you know, you're riding that horse awfully hard in the heat. And he said, she's an older horse. She was about 14 years old at the time, which was old for a horse. And he said, you're going to ride that horse and you're going to kill her. And he said, I'm going to tell you one thing, you kill that horse and you're going to bury it. And I said, well, boy, I better watch out what I'm doing. Anyway, I'm riding out across the prairie subsequently with some of my buddies. We're riding as fast as we can go on a hot August afternoon. And she stumbled about 3 times and down she went on her side. And I had trouble getting out of the saddle because I had a leg caught in the stirrup on the side that she was laying on. And I finally got loose from her. And there wasn't any question of what she was dead. The blood was running out of her nostrils. She just had gasped about 3 times, and that was the last. She wasn't even breathing. Now I've got to do a number of things. I've got to get that saddle off the dead horse, which is difficult because she's laying on part of it. I took the cinch and got that loose and yanked the saddle off. The saddle, interestingly enough, was worth more than the horse was in the final analysis. Took off her bridle, and I'm thinking, well, if I got to bury it, I better go back to our house, our barn, and get a shovel and so forth. As I'm walking back, I'm diagramming in my mind how I'm going to do it. And I decided that I would dig a hole on her one side. She's laying on her right side, and I thought I'll dig a hole on the other side in the form of a U. And then I'll get on my black horse, and I'll put a lariat around my Hazel, who was the white horse. I'll put a lariat around her, and I'll flip her clear over 180 degrees and flip her into this trench on the right side. That way I don't have to dig a hole that's real deep, and I can dig it in the form of a U. So I go back to the ranch and I get a shovel, and I come back and I start digging. And boy, it was hot. It's about 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I finally got the hole dug on the back side of her, threw the lariat around her front feet, kicked my black horse in the ribs. She flips my white horse over, and the white horse, old Hazel, landed on her back with 4 feet sticking in the air. Now I dug this hole about 3 foot deep, which was as wide as her body was, a hole about like this. Now she's laying in the hole on her back with the 4 feet sticking up, and I've got the hole about half deep enough, and there's no way in the world that I can dig under this dead horse. So I'm thinking I got to figure out some way to cut her legs off, because I can't bury this horse out here with 4 feet sticking up in the air. Plus, it's getting dark now, and you could hear the coyotes over there, and I knew if I left her like it was the coyotes were going to come in gnawing on her legs. So I go back, and I get an axe, and I get a saw, and I'm going to figure out how to take those legs out. Well, by this time, by the time I got back, rigor mortis had set in, and those four legs were sticking up in the air, and I mean they're solid, just like a hunk of wood. So I whacked one of those legs a couple times with the axe and just go boing, and they'd shake like that. No way in the world I can cut her legs off with an axe. So I take the saw. But this time it's like 10 o'clock at night, 11 o'clock at night, and I'm sawing the legs off of this horse. Finally I got the legs sawed off, and I laid them down beside her, covered the hole up, and now I covered it up. Then I'm looking around, and I found a few rocks and things like that, and I piled on top of it. I told my dad about it, and I thought he was going to die laughing. He said, "Boy," he said, "I've heard people burying horses. I never heard of anybody burying one upside down." He said, "This has got to be a first." But we lived in the section of Nebraska called the Sand Hills. And it wasn't sand as from the standpoint of sand on a beach. It would grow bluegrass, and our hills were covered with nice grass. It was never meant to be farmed. It was never meant to put plows in it. But after during World War I, there was such a shortage of food and so forth. Much of that land was plowed, and it became part of what was known in the Depression as the Dust Bowl. It was known as the Dust Bowl because the wind, the constant wind, was blowing all that soil north from Kansas, Oklahoma, and so forth. And that's when the people moved from Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, places like that, out to California, Idaho, and farther out west. There was a tremendous movement of people out of that area because of the dust. Anyway, this sand was easy to dig in, and it would grow grass, and it ultimately became very prolific in growing corn because irrigation systems were set up on the land. And the land is all laid out in section lines. There's 1 mile, 1 mile, 1 mile, 1 mile straight out, and each section consists of 640 acres. But the irrigation systems are spiral irrigation, so when you fly over that part of Nebraska, the Sandhill, you see round cornfields because of the spiral irrigation systems that are set up. Anyway, this land was relatively easy to dig into, and of course burying this horse was no big deal, as if I would have been burying her in Tennessee or someplace like that where there would have been rocks and things to go through. But my buddy and I, this pasture where I buried my horse was owned by my dad. It was a 640 acre pasture, and a river ran through it. It was called the South Fork River. It was the South Fork of the Elkhorn River. This little town of Ewing had two rivers, one on each side of it, and I think that's probably why it was selected for a town initially when the early settlers came out, which were my ancestors, and started this little town there. But in the river was a real high bank. I suppose maybe it was 30 feet high at the bend in the river. And my close friend, Red Hartford, who was some kind of a guy, his dad owned the little bakery in town. Red and I decided we were going to build a cave inside this bank of the river, on the river's bend. Red knew a little hole that was in the fence at the local lumber yard, and he knew how to slip in there and pull 2x4s out and slide them out, and we'd haul them out to reinforce this cave we were building. And we dug and we dug and we dug, and we built this gorgeous cave that was about the size of a 9 by 12 room. And it wasn't difficult, as I say, because the sand was very easy when we just threw it out into the river. And we had our clubhouse in this little cave that we dug. Well, there were also cattle grazing in this area. One time after school, we're sitting in our little clubhouse in the cave on the river, and a cow walked over the top of our cave and crashed through the roof. And there I'll never forget it as long as I live. We're sitting in this cave, and boom, through the roof comes this cow, and she can't get out, of course, because it's too deep, and she's flat thrashing around in there, kicking us over. And Red had long, big, bushy red hair. He was just covered with sand. He looked like a snowman with all this sand. He's on one side of the cow, I'm on the other. We can't get the cow out of there. We thought we were going to die. We thought it was the end of the world because this cow fell into our clubhouse and, of course, ruined it. Ultimately, of course, we got out and slid down the bank down into the river, and the cow was up there thrashing around, and she finally got out of there too. But that was the same kind of land in which we buried the horse. we had dug this cave. But Red, Hartford was very innovative. We had one hill in the entire area that for miles around. There was one relatively small hill, and they called it Nipples Knoll. And it was in the side of another piece of property that my dad owned. And we had huge snow in Nebraska. Boy, from 1st of November till the 1st of April, we'd have snow 5-6 feet deep, and the roads were almost impassable, but you got to, and when I moved to Columbus, Ohio, and learned that they closed the schools when you get a little snow on the ground, I was absolutely amazed, because I can remember when we'd walk to school. We had no school buses in those days. We'd walk to school, and the snow would be hip deep, and there still would always be school. The school never closed. But he decided that we'd build a toboggan and slide down this Nipples Knoll thing. So we found a piece of sheet iron. It was 4 by 8. And if you know what sheet iron is, corrugated sheet iron, it's ruffled on the contour. Many buildings out in the West are built and the siding is this corrugated steel because it lasts forever. And so he decided, Red Hartford was smarter than I was about building things, and he's a year or so older, and so he decided that we'd push the front end of the corrugated steel up like the front of a toboggan, and then we took 2x2s and ran them back from the front of the thing and held the nose up and ran so we'd have something to hold on to. And we drag that thing up on top of Nipples Knoll. It was probably 75 or 80 foot high. But it was very steep on the one side where we were going down. So on our first run, we get in there. I'm on the bottom and he's on top of me. There's no way to steer it or anything. But he ran along beside me, pushing me till he got it going, and then he jumped on top of me, and about that time, we hit this drop. Well, we thought we would just sail out and just float out real nicely into the snow. But instead of that, it gets out about 15 feet from the edge of the land, and then it goes straight down. And we were diving straight down. We dove down right straight 50 or 60 feet into the snow, and both of our faces rammed into this corrugated steel that we had turned up in front of us. I looked at him. He got blood running down his face. He looks at me. I got blood running down his face. And he said, "Well, I guess that's the end of this toboggan thing. You ain't never going to get me on one of those." And boy, that was the last of our thing. We took that corrugated steel back where we got it and put it in. But those are examples of some of the things. We made our own fun out there. I mean, there wasn't any television. Nobody sat around home listening to the radio or anything. We read a lot in the wintertime. It was always cold in your house because there was no central heating. It was all, the heat was made out of the kitchen stove in the kitchen and out of the base burner, they called it, in the living room. But those are a couple of things I wanted to get into that I thought were kind of interesting with our career ages 10 till 12. Oh, and then we got the Boy Scouts came to town. Some guy was going to form a Boy Scout group. So all of our gang joined the Boy Scouts. As a matter of fact, there wasn't Cub Scouts or anything. He joined it, and we were all tenderfoot. And our first camp out, we went out and built kind of lean-tos, and we had bunks in there. We had double deckers, and in this lean-to. And on our first camp out, dads went with us, and the dads got the lower bunks, and the kids had to be up on top. And we put the food in kind of a hammock thing, strung it across the roof of the thing to keep the animals from getting in and so forth. So the guy that was sleeping, the dad that was sleeping below me snored. And boy, I mean, he just rattled that place as he snoring. And I thought as I reached, some way I got to wake him up, and then I've got to get to sleep before he does, before he starts snoring. So I reached over in this hammock, and I found a loaf of bread. And I took this loaf of bread and dropped down on his stomach, and he snorted a couple times and woke up and didn't really know what happened, but I'm thinking to myself, sleep, 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 go to sleep, go to sleep. Next thing I know, he's sawing them off before I do. He beats me to sleep. So I thought, well, I got to try something else. And I reached over and I got a box of cornflakes the next time. I threw the box of cornflakes down on him. Again, he beat me to sleep. The third time, I reached over and I got a big can of pears. and I meant to throw it down on his belly, but I missed his belly and hit his head. And boy, I'm telling you, that stopped his snoring, and he came out of that thing, and he ran the rest of us out of there so he could sleep in there alone. We had to sleep outside on the ground. But the Boy Scouts became relatively successful. I don't think I ever got out of the tenderfoot class, but I guess I did. I might have made first class or second class. But contrary to you, Doug, I believe you made Eagle Scout, didn't you? You were up there.
Close.
You were up there someplace. It's a great movement, and I think next to the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, which we've previously discussed on there, I think it's one of the best youth movements that there is, and I'm very sorry that right now the ACLU is attempting to discredit the Boy Scouts, and they've gotten them kicked off of military property and things of that nature because of the Scout Oath and the fact that you've got to believe in God. So that kind of brings me to a conclusion again. Cozy, is there anything else I haven't?
War story.
This is Cosette Mitchell, who was...
He'll be cutting that. War story.
I don't know what to talk about during the war. There's so many things that... I originally was in the Air Force. I talked about this somewhat, didn't I? I was at Oxnard, California, when I took my basic
No,
training.
we wanted to know some things that happened, like in battle.
Well, I was telling her, and then I went in with the Royal Canadian Air Force, and then they passed the Draft Act, and 3 of us came back to the United States. I went in the Navy. My buddy Jack Hickey went back in the Air Force, and Jerry Ledyard, who was the third guy, became a civilian instructor back at the basic place we had originally taken our primary training, because it was primary, basic, and then advanced. But I went in the Navy and went to Columbia University, and in 90 days, if you had a college education, you could become an ensign. You took solid Navy stuff for 90 days. And I was there October, November, and December of 1942. And we used to stand watch on the Prairie State, which was an old sailing vessel that had been converted into a training ship. And boy, it was cold on that Hudson River. Boy, I was standing watch on that Prairie State. It was awful. Anyway, when we finished, we were assigned to different types of things, and I was sent to the Naval Air Station down in Norfolk, Virginia. And shortly after I got there, I was sent to Ohio State University to take a course designed to teach us how to identify enemy aircraft from our own. In those days, in early 1943, the Navy and the Army were shooting down more of our own airplanes than enemy planes, because they couldn't identify them. They didn't know who was friend and who was foe. And anything that flew over, everybody shot at because they weren't taking any chances. So this guy at Ohio State developed a procedure to help identify aircraft. And I think 75 of us were sent there from the Naval Air Station in Norfolk to take a course which lasted 3 months. Most of the students at Ohio State, the male students, had gone to war, and it was probably 75% girls. And I met Mary Jane very early on there. And I think I went into that.
Covered all that. What were some of the ways that they were able to identify? Was it by shape, sound?
Shape sound was a very interesting form. They would put a picture on the screen, and you'd study the various characteristics of it. And they would give you the identifying characteristics. Notice the tail does this instead of that. Notice the wing is this way or that way, and so forth, the general formation. And you'd study the thing while it was sitting still on the screen. Then they start flashing it on and off. And then you'd get to look at it maybe a half minute. And then they'd cut it down to a fourth a minute. And then they cut it down to 10 seconds. And then they cut it down to 2 seconds. So that we got so that just boom, boom, boom. The minute that thing was flashed on there, we could identify it. And then we went out and we went to the various... The problem was, and it was a very a real fault, I think, in the program. Because when you went to the school, you didn't know whether you were going to be sent to the Pacific or the Atlantic for the European War. So you had to be able to identify all the airplanes in the world, both friendly. You had Russian, German, Japs, American, the whole bit, New Zealand, Australia, the whole work. And then you'd be sent to either one of the war theaters. So I went to the Pacific,
Would you get that?
able to identify every airplane that was flying in Europe or anyplace else.
Now, how were you then expected to be used on the ship? Were you supposed
Well,
to
I
teach
went with
other
a
people,
squadron.
or-
The Navy had just developed a new type of destroyer, and the type of destroyer was called the Fletcher class. And I've got a whole pile of stuff in there on the destroyers of World War II, and the Fletcher class were the ideal ships. They were about as long as 3 football fields and very narrow. They were about 30 feet wide. They were just like a knife, and they were the fastest ships in the war. And I went out with the first Fletcher class squadron, and I was assigned to the squadron. The squadron consisted of 9 destroyers. 9 went to war in the Pacific, and 3 came back had never been hit or sunk. We had about half of them had been sunk, and the rest of them had been badly damaged. But it was a great experience because it was a new form of fighting. We had torpedoes, we had depth charges, we had 5-inch guns, we had 3-inch guns, we had 40-millimeter guns, we had 20-millimeter guns. We had every type of method of destroying whatever it was we wanted to destroy. We could destroy submarines, we could destroy ships, and we were constantly involved in shore bombardments. We would go in D-6 and start our shore bombardments, and D-Day, the troops would come in and we'd support their landing. We'd be shooting over them as they were going in the beach. Then we'd hang around 3 or 4 more days and give them what they called call fire. They'd call us and tell us the gradient into which they wanted us to shoot, and then we'd do our shooting into the targets that they had designed for us. And at the end of usually 3, 4, 5 days, after the initial bombardment, or after the initial landing, then they would have their guns, the guys on the beach would have their guns set up, and we'd move on to the next operation. I think as I told you, the Nicholas has the record, and it's on a destroyer that's sitting down in the harbor of Charleston right now. You go aboard that, and you see the names of 3 ships up there, the Nicholas, O'Bannon, and the Taylor. All 3 of them were the 3 surviving destroyers of our squadron. And the Nicholas turned out, as the Navy says, was the greatest fighting ship in the history of the United States Navy. And our squadron was the greatest fighting squadron in World War II. We had the Presidential Unit Citation. We had every citation that could be granted. We started at Guadalcanal. I think I said some of this in there.
Said some of it. Like,
First afternoon I get there, I go aboard the ship and we go up. Our job was to keep the Japs from reinforcing the islands. And the Marines on Guadalcanal had told the Navy that they could take care of the Japs that were currently on the island, just don't let any more of them in. And our job was patrolling every night in the water surrounding Guadalcanal and sinking anything that was in sight.
So you weren't an escort ship?
Anything that moved, we sank.
You were not an escort ship,
Well, no, we didn't escort.
like carriers?
We always operated with the carriers, but they weren't called escort ships. Well, to give you an idea of the task force in an operation, we'll say we're going into the Philippine Islands. Well, no, that was too big there. We're going in on an operation. We've got 50 destroyers circling the entire task force. Inside of this circle, we have light cruisers, heavy cruisers, battleships, and aircraft carriers. And
How many ships in total?
the destroyers, well, we were in some of them had 100, 150 ships in them.
Whoa, that's big.
On big operations. We went into Iwo Jima as an example, Tarawa, some of the bigger ones. Some of the smaller ones, Hollandia, New Zealand, and so forth, they would just be destroyers. But
Tell us all the places that you fought.
well, I started at Guadalcanal, we had to secure Guadalcanal. Guadalcanal was very important because it was the last outpost north of Australia and New Zealand. And it was the intention of the Japs, of course, to hold that and then field their operation into Australia and New Zealand. And had they gotten past us at Guadalcanal, then the next thing they do is take Australia, New Zealand, and keep right on going. They'd already taken Borneo and everything over on the other coast and so forth. So our job was to keep them from going any farther. Fortunately, very fortunately, in early 1942, the Navy compromised the Japanese code. And this was the deciding, I think if there was one thing that you could call the deciding factor in the Pacific in World War II, was the fact that the code was compromised and we knew mostly what the Japs were going to do before they did it, and we could be there and meet the challenge. Battle of Midway, which was a huge battle. We knew they were forming up there, and we were there first, and we sank 3 Japanese carriers as a result of the fact that we knew they were going to be there, and we were literally waiting for them. And if they'd send part of their task force would be here, part of them would be here, and we'd be in the middle so they couldn't join up, taking on both sides of it. Hollandia, New Zealand, we went up in the Gilberts and the Marshall Islands. Tarawa was a big one, but
What was it like? What was the bloodiest battle? Like, what was it? When were you the most concerned?
the bloodiest battle that I was in, and when the ship I was on, I was riding the Hopewell at that time, was going in between Corregidor and Bataan in the invasion of Manila, and we were going in between. Corregidor was on one side, Bataan was on the other, and there was a channel going in that was probably 5 miles wide into Manila Bay. The Japs controlled Bataan, they controlled Corregidor. The Bataan became very well known in history because it was the Bataan Death March that all of the guys that were captured in early 1942, we held out. I say the United States held out in the Philippines from December 7th, 1941, when they hit Hawaii, Pearl Harbor, until April of 1942. Then the whole place was taken over, and the Japs came in. MacArthur escaped with a PT boat. He was the only one that got out of there. The rest of the guys were captured, and they marched from one end of Bataan to the north end of Bataan, and there was an 80% casualty rate. I mean, they weren't being fed, didn't have water. They took their helmets away from them so the sun was bearing down on their head. The guys would carry each other as long as they could. If they dropped them down, the Japanese would bayonet them. It was a horrible, horrible thing. But that started in April of 1942.
So when were you there?
On Valentine's Day, 1945, we went in and retook Manila. And it was our job to give fire protection to the minesweepers to sweep the channel in this 5-mile area between Bataan and Corregidor. The minesweeps were in a V ahead of us, and we were in a column behind them. The Japs owned the guns that were in Corregidor. The guns on Corregidor had been put there by the Americans early on, back in the 30s and the 20s and so forth, when we had gone into Manila, into the Philippines originally. But these guns were 6-inch guns, and they were on a little railroad track. And they'd load the gun back in the cave. They were all in the mouth of caves. They would load the guns back in the cave, shove it out to the mouth of the cave, fire at the target, and the recoil would take it back into the cave, and you had about that much time to get a bead on the gun when it came out. So we're in a column behind the minesweeps that were in a V, and 3 of the guns on Corregidor had a spot zeroed in where the first minesweep went. And the first minesweep went into this spot, and they fired and sunk it, and the next 2 couldn't get stopped in time. They glided into the same spot, and they were hit and were sinking. So we got about 100 of our guys in the water. And the Commodore said, we're going in and pick them up. And I said, you do? And we're going to get hit. He said, we're going to pick them up. We go in and we start picking up the survivors, and they get us. We had 7 guys killed. Everybody behind me on the bridge was killed. I was the last guy alive on the bridge, on the one side of the bridge. The only thing that saved me was the flag bag.
What was killing them?
The guns from Crickador. The flag bag is a big steel trunk type thing in which we keep the flags. And they're all in lines, and they have snaps on them. And when we're going to run up the signal flag, they pull the lines down and they put the particular flag on the line, and they're running it up, and finally they get them all up there, and then that's the signal to them. One I can think of, Terra Victor George. Terra Victor George, well done, you done well. Down comes flag. Anyway, this flag bag was made out of steel. And I was standing ahead of the flag bag. A couple guys behind me that were killed were on the other side of the flag bag. But anyway,
What was it like when you were standing
when
there?
they opened the flag bag to run up the flags were all in shreds, like somebody had gone in there with a pair of scissors and cut them up, because all the fragments of the shell that had exploded behind it had permeated into that flag bag. And I only saw one act in the 13 battles in which I participated in World War II. I only saw one act of cowardice, and it was a Jewish ensign named Klein, who I believe it was on. No, it wasn't on this incident. It was on another. But I happened to be on the side of the bridge where he was, and we were taking a lot of kamikazes were coming in. The kamikazes. There was 131 day stretch that we had at least one kamikaze come in on it. So you can imagine, everybody was scared to death of the kamikaze, because in August of 1945, by August of 1945, we had 65 destroyers either sunk or damaged at Okinawa by suicide planes. That's what a threat they had become. Anyway, this suicide plane was coming in, and it came right at, and it took our radar off the top of the mast. It was that close, and it crashed on the other side of it. And this guy was cowering in a corner of the bridge. He'd gotten over there in the corner, and he had his hands over his head, and he was down just shaking. And I grabbed him by the back of his shirt and yanked him up and kicked him in the balls. And I said, "You're some kind of an example you're setting for the enlisted men are coming up here." I said, "For Christ's sake, stand up here and act like a man." I slapped him a couple times, and he's crying. But that was the only time everybody else, you were so busy, and there was so much going on that you really didn't think about being afraid. Plus, I think everybody was like Chuck Brannon was when he was killed. He always said, "They've never made that bullet yet that's got my name on it." And, you never thought that you were going to be killed. But
How did you feel?
bravery
You saw
was-
those other guys getting killed right beside you.
well, you don't have time to think that much about them. I mean, God, I saw one guy that was laying over the back of the part of the bridge, and he was laying his back. He was just laying like, because his back was broken, and he was shot in the shoulder, and his guts were hanging out, and he was laying backwards over a bridge, like he'd been folded backwards instead of frontwards over the thing. You see the guys that are dead, and kind of lay them aside and take the guys that are still living and take them down to our sick bay, which was our mess hall. The officers' mess hall was the sick bay where they docked. Each destroyer had an MD on board. We had an MD, and we had 8 pharmacist mates. And in those battles, when they were getting hit, they were getting a lot of work.
Did you tell about?
We had a doctor I was on the Taylor. My job was going from destroyer to destroyer in the squadron, and training lookouts and so forth, and officers into how to identify an airplane. So I served on a lot of destroyers, and I had a very unique situation, because coming from the Commodore staff, the Commodore was in charge of all the destroyers in our squadron, of course. And when I come aboard, they think I'm a representative of the Commodore, and the captain and everybody else just busted their butt to do the best they could, because they figured I was going to report back to the Commodore about how good or how bad their ship was. So they were always on their best behavior when I came. They thought I was a spy for the Commodore. which I wasn't necessarily, although he always asked me how they were doing, what do you think about, and so forth, and I'd always tell him and so forth. But on the Taylor, the doctor was an obstetrician, had been an obstetrician.
Great.
The skipper of the Taylor was Benny Katz, K-A-T-Z, who had been one of the few Jewish officers that ever graduated from the Naval Academy. Anyway, he was captain of the Taylor, and he was a martinet. A martinet is somebody that is not liked by the crew. I mean, he's going by the book, and the slightest little situation that he can make into something big and demote somebody or something, he'll do it. He was a bad actor. One of his bad habits was that whenever we'd get into a secure port where it was safe, we'd have movies. And the movies were always shown on the back end of the ship, on the fantail. They'd erect a screen in front of one of the 5-inch guns, and the men, the enlisted men, would have to sit wherever they could find a place. They'd sit on the barrels of the guns, they'd sit on the top of the bridge or whatever. But the officers all had chairs down in the front row for the movie. And the chairs had come from the officers' wardroom where the officers ate. The officers' wardroom was, there were usually about 25 officers on a destroyer. And we had our own mess attendants, they'd make up our bunk, we had our special cook. I'll tell you, to be in the Navy, you should be an officer. That was the only way to go, because we had everything, telling everybody to wait on us and everything like that. But anyway, the captain was always late to come to the movies. And they couldn't start the movies until the captain got there. So we've got this one movie, we're all sitting around and waiting for the captain, old Benny Katz, and he didn't come. And the doctor's about half boozed up on medicinal alcohol that he had. He was an alcoholic, but he had access to the medicinal alcohol on the ship. And we're all complaining about the captain. And so finally Benny Katz comes down, and of course he gets the best seat. The best seat is right beside the starboard side of the ship, because the breeze always is coming from that direction. When you're anchored, your ship moves around depending on the wind. And Benny Katz always had the seat right beside the rail on the starboard side. So Benny comes in and sits down. The doctor's seat is chairs behind him. And the doctor's a pretty good size. Benny Katz was about 5'6", little guy, probably weighed 115, 20 pounds. The doctor goes up and grabs Benny by the neck and throws him over the side. Benny Katz is down there in the water, thrashing around. Throw me a line. What the doctor does, pick up his chair and throws his chair at him, throws his chair down on top of him. Well, there's a device on the side of a destroyer. It's called a screw guard, and it's a part of the ship, a little frame that's built out over the screws so that you don't get into them, or flotsam or jetsam or whatever, doesn't get into the screws that often. It's kind of designed to protect the screws that run the destroyer. Benny swims over and gets a hold of the screw guard, and nobody was getting a line, and he's down there hollering, "Throw me a line, throw me a line." Finally, the executive officer, who was, of course, in charge with the captain in the water, throws him a line and pulls him on board.
Because nobody liked him? Is that why they
Oh,
threw him?
yeah, hell, everybody on the ship would have permitted him to drown, except if he'd have drowned, the executive officer would have been kicked out of the Navy probably because he was in command. And anyway, they get Katz out of the water, and he is wet, and he is mad. And he is, who did this? And the exec said, well, Doc did it. Get him, put him in irons. So they took him, hustled him off and put him in irons. The next morning they took him off the ship, and that's the last we ever saw him. But we heard subsequently that he pleaded temporary insanity. He got off, but he never went back to sea, but he pleaded temporary insanity for throwing the captain over the side.
When you put them in irons, what do they do?
Well, he put him in irons, and then the shore patrol comes the next.
What does that mean, put them in irons? They handcuff them?
Combine him, yeah. And the next port we came to, or maybe that port, the shore patrol would come on board and get him. But that's the only case I've ever seen him putting him in irons, which is an old Navy term. Those are the kind of the fun things. We had great officers. And of course, as I've told you many times, one of my best friends, who was also on the staff of the squadron, was Les Fleming, who was from Michigan. And I think I mentioned on this thing earlier on, I knew about in the last year of the war that I was going to law school because of the GI Bill. I mean, it paid my tuition, paid my books, and I got $65 a month if you were married. If you weren't married, you got $45 a month for living expenses. And I decided, Fleming was still in. To get out of the Navy, you had to have so many points. Being married gave you extra points, and I was married, and so I had additional points, and I could get out when the war was over. Les had to go a couple of months longer than I did because he wasn't married. And I wrote him a letter on board ship after I was out about law school, and when he got it, he said he was in the wardroom reading his mail, and he threw it up in the air and said, I know what I'm going to do now, I'm going to law school. So when he came out, he went to the University of Michigan, and I went to Ohio State. And to the best of our account, we've decided we made 33 consecutive Ohio State Michigan football games. We made the Snow Bowl. We used to come up, if they played in Columbus, Fleming would come down on Thursday. We'd horse around at the athletic club if the weather was bad, or we'd play golf at the DCSC or wherever on Friday, and then go to the game on Saturday. Saturday night, we'd go to the athletic club for a party, and Sunday he would go home. But the Snow Bowl, Les still wasn't married, and he came down with a date in a Cadillac convertible. And boy, the snow was deep. I mean, they never should have played the game. It started to snow Friday night, and Saturday morning there had to be 3 feet of snow in Columbus. And by the time the game started, you couldn't even see the field. At the end of every 3 plays, as I recall it, they had guys out there with a snowblower to show you where the lines were, where the yardage marker were on the football field. Anyway, at the halftime, you could sit any place you wanted to. There are probably 500,000 people that claim they've been at the Snow Bowl, in the Snow Bowl game. There weren't 25,000, maybe 30,000 there at the most. So you could sit any place you wanted to. As a matter of fact, you couldn't even tell where the seats were. You just go. We sat on the 50-yard line about 40 rows up, but the aisles became covered with snow. It was just like a ski slope, leaving your seat, I mean, if you're going down. And of course, we all had to go at the half, but Fleming was the only one. I'm going. I said, I'm not going down there. Fleming stepped out in the aisle to go down, and first thing he hit, of course, he hit a slippery step, and he slid all the way on his back from the 50th row, clear down into the box seats. And in those days, the box seats had wooden chairs, wooden folding chairs, you know. He hit that, and nobody was sitting in they were down too low. Anyway, he went into this box, feet first, down this snow slide, and you could see those wooden chairs fly all over, half broken. Mary J. says, somebody's got to do something. I said, what do you mean? What can we do? He's dead. He said, he's got to have been killed. Nobody could stand this. And she's yelling, and we're looking down. All of a sudden, Fleming gets up, shakes himself off, and goes around through the exit. Then he can't get back to his seat, of course. He can't climb back up that thing. Well, we've had so many good times. I remember one time, the game was in Michigan, and Les was dating a girl named Pat, who had been married before, a divorced girl, and she was living with her folks because she had, I think, one little kid. And the folks were very well-to-do, had a beautiful home, and they were. There was a football party afterward at their place. We all go to this party at their place, and there's a lot of drinking and carrying on. Of course, I forget who won the football game. But the snow was so beautiful, and their yards were so big that everybody said, let's start a game of fox and goose. So the gals all, get this, the gals all took off their shoes and their hose and ran out in the snow barefooted and made the big circle and made the lines in and the center place, you know, where you were safe when you went. Did you ever play fox and goose in the snow? It's a real great. The gals were all playing fox and goose in their bare feet on this beautiful lawn on the thing. We had a lot of great parties. And we went on a lot of vacations together. We became, our families became very good friends. And unfortunately, right now, Les is in very bad shape physically. His wife, Pat, died, and he married a lady from Columbus, moved to Columbus. And they live out in the quarry. But he's not in good shape at all. But we had so many good times in the war and in football games and on vacations. I suppose he's my best friend that's still alive. But anyway, that's about it, guys. Unless you can think of something else. The war was hell. There's no question about it. I would say about war, I wouldn't have missed it for the world. But I sure as hell hate to go through it again. But it was the greatest, next to meeting and marrying Mary Jane. The war was well actually I would never have met and married Mary Jane had it not been for the war. Because I met her during the war. I would never have been at Ohio State had it not been for the war. It was the number one most important thing in my life. It was a great experience, but it was a terrible experience. And when I think of all the destruction and the death that's caused by wars, I cannot understand why the human race can't resolve their differences some way other than killing each other. But it's been going on for thousands of years and will probably continue to go on for thousands of years. Man's inhumanity to man is probably the worst thing that happens on this earth. And war is certainly the capitalization of man's inhumanity to man. The Japanese were absolutely the most cruel people in the world. And the thing that devasts me right now is the American people that are complaining about our treatment of POWs. We know that the POWs that are being taken by the Taliban and so forth in Iraq are beheading the prisoners. They're torturing them in any way that they think is necessary to get whatever they think. The Japanese were just as bad, 10 times worse, but yet during World War II, I never heard that first complaint that we were treating the Japanese prisoners badly, because we were treating them badly. They would normally not surrender, and as I told you, we'd run over them, we'd drown them. We wouldn't even try to pick them up. We'd make Japanese soup, as the Commodore used to say.
Oh, gosh.
But
Joey,
our current generation of liberals who are trying to tell us that we should close Guantanamo Bay and that we should be more concerned with the civil rights of our prisoners is absolutely ridiculous. War is an inhuman thing, and you can't let up. I mean, it just turns people into animals, and that's the nature of the beast, and it's going to continue until somebody figures out what can be done about it, and nobody's been able to for hundreds and hundreds of years.
I think there's a plan in motion as we speak.
I would never have been in law school had it not been for the war. Our children, of course, would never have been born. You guys would never have been here had it not been for the war. Everything that ever happened to me is somehow or another connected with having been in the war. And the Navy was far and above the best place to be. There just wasn't any question about it. The Marine Corps was the worst place to be. The Marine Corps is the greatest assembly of brave people that I've ever seen in my life. Absolute. The bravest of the brave in the Marine Corps. Second would be the underwater demolition people, ADTs in the Navy, the guys that parachute, the guys that come in underwater demolition, and so forth. The Army is the worst place to be. I mean, the Army is just an assembly. As far as I'm concerned, having been in the Navy, the Army is a congregation of people that couldn't make it in the Navy, Marine Corps, or Coast Guard. And the only reason they're in the Army is because they couldn't make it for it. But this is not true. You ask anybody in the Army, they're there, they find because they want to be. And some of my very best friends here today are veterans of the Army.
Some people love the Army because it's boots on the ground. And then now that's what the Navy's doing in Iraq.
Well, I don't know whether you want boots on the ground is the worst thing I can think of.
I know, but that's,
sure don't
they
wanna
think
be-
it's hand-to-hand combat. They think it's the most exciting. The Army does.
You don't have much hand-to-hand combat in the Navy, but you sure do if you're a SEAL. And there are more boots on the ground. That's a peculiar phrase as far as I'm concerned, but the Navy has more guys on the ground in this Iraq war than they've ever had in any other war. But some of the greatest of my memories are Army-Navy games. Incidentally, we went to, I think, 5 or 6 consecutive Army-Navy games after the war. And I spent this morning with Jeannie Henry reading emails that I'd accumulated on her machine the last 4 or 5 days. She doesn't take them off very often. I think she had something like 100, and her thing over there, her address is jeanniejacks.comcast/net or something like that. Anyway, Jeannie Jacks. And it's Jeannie Jacks because her last husband was named Jack, and she has that thing. But anyway, I've got a 3-page thing in there that in the Navy-Utah game, a bad decision was made by the officials. It's all been agreed to. They've all admitted that it was that when the ball was fumbled and hit the pylon, they all gave it back to Utah, and after they ultimately ended up kicking a field goal, and the ball should have been the Navy ball at that time, and they never should have had the score. And the score should have been the Navy should have won the game by 3 points. And this is the printout on the thing about how they came to the decision, and how now after the game the officials all admit that they made a mistake. Can you imagine that? And none of the 3 officials knew what the proper call was if the ball hit the pylon, you know. But I don't regret a day that I ever spent in the Navy. Wouldn't want to go again, but I sure wouldn't want to miss what I was doing.
You guys have anything else you want to think would be good?
Well, that's more than anybody's going to want to watch.
Well, he's gonna edit. You gotta have a lot of tape to edit.
Well, hook these guys in. Pull it.
No. This is about you.
Yeah, it's about me, that's what.
You're the guy that's
You know, can you
got
imagine?
the cool stories.
But the thing that is so remarkable as far as I'm
These guys
concerned,
in.
the thing that's so remarkable to me is that I'm 90, my next birthday I'll be 90 years old. No one in my family has lived that long. My dad lived till 86. And my mother died at 60, she was 62. Mary Jane's mother died at 52. Her dad died at 62. Her brother Pat, General Pat Brannan, died at 52. Her brother Chuck, who was killed in Korea, died at 26. And here I am, coming on 90, still hobbling around. It's incredible. And I think a lot of it has to do with Mary Jane's intense study of what was good to eat and what was not good to eat, and what was good to exercise and what to keep going. And I exercised with a great deal of devotion and regularity for years at the athletic club. I played at least 3 games, I played handball at least 3 times a week for, I guess, 40 years at least. And I think that has helped my well-being. I think I've been relatively careful in what I ate. I've always thought I was probably drinking too much, but it apparently didn't hurt me that much because I'm still alive. But my mind is still functioning reasonably well. I'm forgetful in some extent, but I don't think I forget anything that's very important. Plus, I can remember back to the time I was in the 1st grade. I can remember going to kindergarten. I can remember my teachers' names in kindergarten all the way through the 8th grade through high school.
Do you have any poems on there?
Three poems.
Recite a few poems. No, that's amazing. Seriously.
All right, go ahead.
Ready? Little Boy Blue. Or Little...
Cozy has asked me to.
You don't have to...
We had great teachers in the 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
And we used to have to memorize an awful lot of things. I mean, we memorized everything from the Gettysburg Address, you name it, and we memorized it. We all had to take Latin. I think from before I was in the 8th grade, I had 4 years of Latin. And I think those disciplines at those ages are very important. I remember one of my favorite poems, I think it was by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. The little toy dog is covered with dust, but sturdy and staunch he stands. The little toy soldier is covered with rust, and the musket molds in his hand. Time was when the little toy dog was new, and the soldier was passing fair. That was the time that our little boy Blue kissed them and put them there. Now don't you go till I come, he said, and don't you make any noise. So toddling off to his trundle bed, he dreamed of his little toys. And while he was dreaming, an angel came and took our little boy Blue. Oh, the days will be many, the days may be few, but we shall always remember our little boy Blue. Isn't that cute?
Do you think of any... What
How about Paul Revere's Ride?
Wow. Go.
I can remember that. I can't remember that. I've got to remember the key words to start into it.
I know.
But I can remember.
I can
Remember some of the old songs we used to sing. Like.
Give me the and you will hear the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere.
It was in the summer of '45. Hardly a man is now alive who remembers the famous day in the year. He said to his friends, if the British march by land or by sea from the town tonight, hang a lantern aloft in the belfry arch of the Old North Church as a signal light. One if by land and two if by sea, and I, on the opposite shore, will be ready to ride and spread the alarm through every Middlesex village and farm. Just as the moon rose over the bay, silently, and to her moorings lay the Somerset, a British man of war, a silent ghost ship from each mast to spar. That's about as far as I can go with that.
That's pretty good.
But that's a great piece.
What about
Yeah.
a song?
Just laying around town, spending my time, out of a job and not making a dime.
Hello? Yeah. Yes. We're videotaping now.
Just laying around town, spending my time, out of a job and not making a dime. When up steps a fellow and said, I suppose you're a bronc buster by the looks of your clothes. He says, I got one that's a good one to buck, and throwing good riders, he's had lots of luck. I get all excited and ask what he pays to ride that old pony a couple of days. He offers a 10-spot, I said, I'm your man. There ain't a horse living that I cannot fend. Then we get in the buckboard and rode to the ranch in order to give that old pony his chance. Then in the morning, right after Chuck, we went out to see if that outlaw
I
could
just don't want
buck.
my voice to be on this thing.
There in a horse corral standing alone was a sole vocabulary of a strawberry roan. Little pig ears that touched at the tip, and a big 44 brand on his left hip. I get aboard that baby, and up in the air she goes. She went up in the east and came down in the west, and me in her middle doing my best. That thing goes on. There's about 50. I'll tell you, it's a funny thing. We have a little group that meet a lot of times if we aren't doing anything else, on Friday afternoon we call it a happy hour. And there's kind of a traditional dozen of us that made you bring your own drinks, whatever you want to drink. And then we all eat together afterwards. And we had some new residents move in, and his name is Lad Duria. And they came to visit the happy hour the first time. And it turns out that he was born and raised in Nebraska, graduated from the University of Nebraska, and as soon as we found that out, he and I started singing Nebraska fight songs and that kind of stuff in there. It was so funny because his life was quite similar to mine. And I said to him one time, I said, do you know the Strawberry Roan? And he said, of course I knew the Strawberry Roan. He and I started with that, and the crowd was absolutely amazed that we could go on for about 15 minutes singing a Strawberry Roan song.
What's the Nebraska fight song?
Well, one of the songs, there is no place like Nebraska, dear old Nebraska, you, where the girls are the fairest, the boys are the squarest of any old school that I knew. There is no place like Nebraska, where they're all true blue. We'll all stick together in all kinds of weather for dear old Nebraska, you. And then he pipes up, we all stick together in the summertime because it's so hot and sweaty you can't get loose. What are some of the
Remember
others?
any good Buckeye ones that you liked
No.
in particular?
I mean, fight the team.
Fight the team across the field from we're from Ohio.
Send
the earth reverberating with the might.
Hit them hard and see how they fall. Never let that team get the ball. Hail, hail, the gang's all here for.
Keep your eye on the grand old team. Yeah, Ohio.
You were a bunch of bums.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Ohio.
Ohio, we're not a bunch of bums.
Ba-dum, 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 bum, 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 bum. My dad used to sing some of those songs from Nebraska. He graduated in 1902 from law school at Ohio State.
No,
And he
in
always,
Nebraska.
He always called it, or from Nebraska, I'm sorry. And he always called it the class of naughty two, 1902. Because in those days, and even when I was in grade school, zero was called naught, N-A-U-G-H-T, not. N-O-U-G-H-T, I guess it was, not. So he graduated the class of naughty two. And I can remember when I was a little kid, he'd break out into some of those songs, those old Nebraska songs. And I thought, boy, how goofy can you get? It always embarrassed me if there was anybody around that my dad would sing those goofy songs from Nebraska. And here I break out into them at the slightest provocation.
I have something else. If you could give advice from your life, now this is just off the cuff, because you haven't had time to think about it, for others that will go after you, for your children, your grandchildren, what would the most important advice be?
Well, I think one very important thing, I remember my dad telling me, to thine own self be true. And I said, what do you mean, John? He said, never bullshit yourself. Never try to think or act like you're something that you aren't really. Never live in a fantasy world that you think you've actually created. But he said, to thine own self be true. And it follows as the night, the day, that thou cannot then be false to any man. I don't know that I've always lived that way, but I've always been impressed by to thine own self be true. I think another thing, and my dad was very short on this, was love your spouse with all your heart and soul, and love your family. And don't ever try to be something or hold yourself out to your family that you aren't. The best friend you'll ever have is your spouse. And the divorce rate today is appalling. And the fact that all of these kids are being born out of wedlock. It's just unbelievable to me. You take the oath when you're married uh, to live with each other for the rest of your life. But it's a partnership, and neither one is superior to the other. It's a joint venture. It's a partnership. I regret the fact that I didn't take more of my advice from Mary Jane. She had much better ideas on things than I did, and I could have been a much better person during my lifetime had I followed her advice. I remember when she inherited, or I inherited, one of the two of us inherited like $5,000 from somebody in our family that died. And so Mary Jane said, "What are you going to do with it?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. We're going to put it in the stock market." And she said, "Do you know anything about the stock market?" And I said, "No, not particularly." She said, "Well, why don't we split it up and you invest $2,500 and I'll invest $2,500 and we'll see who does the best." And I said, "That's fair enough, I'll do it." So we split it up. She took $2,500 and I took $2,500. She invested it. She put her money in Sears and Roebuck and IBM. And I put my money in Studebaker Motors, Studebaker Automobiles, and I forget what the other thing was. But within 6 years, my investment, the companies no longer existed. They'd gone out of business. And here Mary Jane is sitting with her 2,500, clipping her coupons and so forth, laughing at me. At any time any investment came along, she said, "Do you want me to help you?" I said, "I sure do. You make a lot better decisions than I do."
Well, you did make most of your money from investing, so how did you learn how to do it correctly?
Well, my motto is pay yourself first. I mean, before you pay anything else, pay yourself, okay? What does that mean? That means pay yourself 15% of what you earn and invest that. And then pay your mortgage, pay your insurance, and then whatever else you have, spend it the way you want to. But you can't invest enough of your income. I don't care how much you're investing, it's not enough. You can make cuts in most of the other areas of the things you buy that is just stuff. And the stuff you buy normally is a figment of your imagination. Well, I'd like to have this because everybody else has it. Or I'd like to have this brand because it's a better brand than somebody else had, and so forth. Too many people are spending too much money for non-essentials when they should be investing it. And they should be investing it in conservative stocks. And my advice is stock funds, not necessarily individual stocks. But Vanguard is the greatest place in the world, the lowest cost for administration, and the best judgment, and they have about 400 different funds you can invest in. And by investing in a fund, you're not standing or falling on one issue of stock, that if it fails, you're out of business. A fund will vary in value, but very seldom do you lose a lot of money. And my suggestion would be anybody that's over 40 years old should have a mixture of 50% bonds and 50% stock. And until you're 50 years old, you should have about 80% stock and 20% bonds. I have done very well in the stock market through funds, but our family, as Cozy Woman knows, watched our money. I mean, we didn't spend any money foolishly. When I was growing up, as I said in an earlier part of this film, we never had an allowance. We earned all of our own money, and we saved our own money. And we paid ourselves first. We invested at least 20%. I can remember when I was 10 years old selling magazines on the street. First 20% I had went in the bank and bought stock or something of that nature. Some very dear friends of ours in Columbus, he was the chief pilot for Abbott Labs, and they never gave their kids an allowance. They all earned their money. And One of them invested in nothing but Abbott Laboratories. From the time he was like 7 years old, he was putting $5 in Abbott Laboratory stock and so forth. I think he retired when he was about 32. He had really hit it with that Abbott Laboratory stuff. But pay yourself first. To thine own self be true. And associate and affiliate with a church and become I'm very proud of you three particularly. Cozy, Chuck, and Doug, because of your religiosity, because of your faith in the Lord. I think it's very, very important. I belong to about every church there is, Protestant, Catholic. I've been Lutheran, been Presbyterian, been First Community. But in the final analysis, I can't think of anything other than love for your mate and respect. Anything more important than being involved in a religious situation. That'll be basically my advice for whatever it's worth. I think you guys are doing that. I think you're buying a lot of stuff maybe that you don't always need, or you don't always want. You buy stuff because somebody else has bought stuff, or you imagine that you need something that really you don't need, instead of you're investing it in the stock market. But you've got to invest to the extent that it hurts. In other words, you've got to deny yourself stuff that maybe you're inclined to buy that isn't going to do you that much good. There's damn little that you buy, I'll tell you this. There's damn little stuff that you're buying today that'll do you as much as good as investing it in the market.
How do you deny yourself stuff? How do you think is a good way to do that?
Well, how do you deny yourself anything?
How do you?
How do you deny yourself anything but air and water, and you just don't buy it. You just don't do it.
But it can be.
You got choice is simple. You do or you don't. It isn't a big deal. You don't. It doesn't hurt you if you didn't get a particular brand that cost twice as much as another brand, or it doesn't hurt you if you didn't buy something other than food, water, or air. That. But
Air's free.
Put your money in the market. So.
Any other advice?
Well, I've got a lot of other advice, but who's going to follow it?
You never know.
Advice is the cheapest thing you can get a hold of. Everybody will give you advice about something. Although when you get to be 90, you have... I've followed a lot of people's advice. Mary Jane's more than anybody. I can't believe how fortunate I have been in having been married to Mary Jane. I can't believe how fortunate it was, and it was absolutely by chance. It was a chance, just almost a flip of a coin. Flip of the coin. And we had not known each other long enough to be madly, passionately in love necessarily. We didn't have the slightest idea of whether we were compatible. We came from substantially different backgrounds. But interestingly enough, her mother and father had both graduated from the University of Nebraska, and my dad had graduated from the University of Nebraska. And my mother had not graduated from high school because she was valedictorian, and she had to give a speech at graduation, and she was very withdrawn and reluctant to give a talk in public. And she told the school, I cannot give a speech, I cannot talk in front of public. Well, you either do or you don't get your diploma.
Oh my gosh.
She didn't take her diploma because she couldn't stand up and give a talk. And I'll never forget. I don't know whether I said it on here before, but the most embarrassing thing, I think, one of the most embarrassing things that ever happened to me was not giving a speech. I was captain of the football team. We were one of the highest scoring football teams that year in the state of Nebraska. We had a great team. We didn't have that many guys out for football. Nebraska was where the 7-man football started because most of the schools were too small to get 11 guys. You could get 11 or maybe 13, but very seldom did the schools the size that I attended have enough to scrimmage because you didn't have 22 people. You had 17, maybe 16, 17, something like that. But we had the football banquet and the parents were all there. And they told me that I'd have to say a few words as captain. So I wrote a little speech and I memorized it. Boy, I memorized that thing. I'd go to the bathroom and I'd stand there giving my speech. I'd be walking to school and I'd be giving I had that thing memorized perfectly. Comes time for me to stand up. I stood up. I couldn't remember that first word. I could not remember the first word. Whether it was now is the time for every man to give his life for his country. I could not, and I had memorized that thing so thoroughly that I had to have that kick-in word to get the thing rolling, and I couldn't remember.
Is that the first time you'd ever?
First time I'd ever been asked to give a speech.
But you didn't take speech then?
I couldn't give a speech.
No, I mean, you didn't take it as a course in high school, they didn't have that.
Didn't have a speech. I got up, I stood there for about 2 minutes, the sweat's just rolling off of me, and I said, wow, and sat down. Everybody claps.
You said, wow?
I said, wow. But I never memorized a speech after that, baby. You couldn't get that kick-in word, you're dead in the water.
Well, but you've never had a problem talking since.
That's right.
Really. You've never had a problem giving a speech since. I've heard you give tons of speeches.
Well, I know, but that first one I sure did.
Gosh. Think we got it all?
Still running.
Well, you can
What advice would you have to give a 90-year-old? Any of you guys give? Well, that's a bad question.
No, Doug and I have
I'm not
advice.
going to ask you guys.
Doug and I have advice. We say live every single day as if it was your last and spend all your money. He said that, I wish Papa would spend all his money before he passes away. But if that's not your natural bent,
Go out and have fun.
Well, I did. I don't know of anything that we ever wanted to do that we didn't do. We've been,
He listed off all the countries he can think of that he's traveled to,
oh good.
and I mean it's just amazing.
Yeah. He's
I
been
bet we've
around.
been in 75, 80 different countries in the world. North Pole, South Pole.
He's been around.
We have been around.
Most of them you went to with Mother.
Yeah.
There's only two things on the list of that he had a list of that somebody wrote of all the things that you need to do, when you live. And there's only two things on the list that he's not done.
I got that out of my magazine. And you can check that out if you want to. Here are this thing is entitled 20 Things You Should Do in Your Lifetime. Visit the country your ancestors called home. We visited Ireland, we visited Scotland, we visited Alsace-Lorraine, we visited Switzerland, and so forth. Leave $1 where a kid will find it. Oh, I did that one time. Threw a bunch of kids lined up for the school bus. I just surreptitiously let the bill fall out of my head. Then we stood back and watched. Hey, you're jumping up and down. Look what I found. It's kind of interesting.
That's a great one.
Fly over the Grand Canyon in a helicopter.
I
We
did
did
that.
this because we went down the Grand Canyon on a raft for 7 days and then flew out to
I'm
Las
3
Vegas.
for 3 on this list.
Lend money to a friend without expecting it back. Ride in a gondola down the Grand Canal in Venice. We've done that. Teach a class. I've done that. See the sunrise over the ruins of Machu Picchu. We've done
Machu Picchu, I have not done that, but Allison has.
Plant a tree, we've done that. Fly on the Concorde, never done that. That's
Haven't done that.
we ain't gonna get that done. Stand on the Great Wall of China, we've done that.
I haven't done that.
Make your own beer, we've done that. See an opera at La Scala in Milan, we've done that. Learn to speak French, I've never done that.
I've done that.
Take a balloon ride over the Serengeti, but we didn't take a balloon ride over the Serengeti, but we took a balloon ride over Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hang up on a lawyer, I've done that a couple of times. Kiss someone passionately in public, I've done that. Play the old course at St. Andrews. Well, I've never played the old course, but we played Ballybunion and several others of the old courses in Ireland. Shoot the rapids on the Snake River in Idaho, I've done that. And then I added fly a glider, I've done that. What forgetting on your do aerobatics, I've done that. I'm going to do that again. You know what, one of the Christmas presents Gina gave me? Flying an AT-6. There's a guy up between here and Knoxville that has an AT-6, which is an Air Force trainer. And,
You're gonna fly it?
yeah, but you fly it with him.
Yeah, but that's great. When are you doing that?
Well, she's got the lesson. I was supposed to call him today, but I didn't. And I'm going to.
I'm glad I recorded that because I need to re-edit, because when you read it the first time, do aerobatics, the first time you read it, you did do aerobics in a plane. I'm like,
man.
do aerobics in a plane. How do you, it's like, is there like a service that you could go to? Exactly. So we were recording before, I'm sitting there trying to figure out, it's like, oh my gosh, and I'm thinking about my flight, it's like, now how do I get up and start doing aerobics in the plane?
No, he
You
means
know,
flying and
I know.
aerobatically.
Yeah.
When I was in the Air Force, we'd get up about 8,000 feet, and we'd see how many spins we could come down before we had the guts to pull out. And it's very difficult to maintain as you're spinning, your airplane coming down, it's very difficult to keep oriented. I mean, you kind of got to pick out something in your head so you know when you've completed that spin and the next spin, and your airplane starts whipping, and whipping, and then the altimeter is going like that. You're keeping your eye on that, and then see how much guts you get to get down to the 500 feet before you pull out and pull in. But anyway, I was going to do. Jeannie said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to do some aerobatics." And she said, "Well, what are you going to do?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to do spins, and I'm going to do loops, and I'm going to do 8s around the pylons, and
You gonna wait till you're 90?
but I'm going to pretend I'm 90." And she said, "Do you think the doctor would let you fly with your high blood pressure and your heart condition?" And I said, "Probably not, but I'll ask the pilot if you have high blood pressure and you're taking blood pressure pills and all that stuff, if it bothers him." And he'd say, "No, it doesn't bother me because you lose control and I got the control anyway, you're not going to crack."
Well, the only reason that you'd take blood pressure medicine and stuff like that is because of that open heart surgery. You didn't really have high blood pressure. They just like you regulated. They like everything. Once you've had your heart invaded, they
He put me on another higher blood pressure pill the other day, Martin did.
Really?
My blood pressure went up to 184, it was spiking.
Oh.
And the next day I went, it was 172, and the next day I went, it was 160. So normally it's like 130 over 80 or whatever, 125, 130. But it was spiking. And he thought I was losing blood internally, that my heart wasn't pumping enough blood internally. So I took a test. Boy, it's a painful thing. He's got a thing like a mouse on a computer, and they press it into your body real hard. Then he's got it registers on a machine, and you hear boom, 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 you can hear the thing on the machine, and it registers on that how much blood pressure is circulating in your guts and your bowels and your back and so forth. And they do it while you're on your back. They do it on your stomach. Then you get on the side, and they do it on your kidneys on each side. and they get on the other side and they do it on your liver. And by the time they're through, they can tell whether or not there's sufficient circulation to these various organs. And he told me that my circulation was okay internally. But he said, I think I ought to give you something to control that high blood pressure, which he did. And which is now controlled. I mean, I'm now back down to 128, 127, over 80.
Great.
But I'm subconsciously hoping when I tell the pilot, if he says, what medications are you on? I tell him and he'll say, I'm sorry, we can't go. But a thing I want to do, too, and I'm scared to do it, and that's go over here with the guy that you can parachute with. He gets on top of you, and you're on the bottom, and it's a paraglider is what it is. They do that down here where I took Allison for the banjo lessons over the hill here. What is that called?
Dunlap.
Dunlap. They've got a big mountain down there, and you come up. But I was checking with a guy down there about 6 months ago. We were going through Dunlap, and I stopped, and I was talking about the guy. I said, where do they do that glider stuff and so forth? And he told me it's out there. And we went out that way, but we couldn't find it. But anyway, I was talking to a guy. I said, where's that glider thing? He said, I'm not sure he's still in business. I said, what do you mean not sure he's still in business? Well, he said he had an accident. I said, what happened? He said they came down flat out on the highway. And he said the guy on the bottom got skinned up pretty good. I said, what about the guy on top? And he said, I think he broke half the bones in his body because he fell off and was sliding down the highway on his butt or something. He said, I'm not sure they're in business anymore.
Oh, no.
But I've done a glider. I did a glider in Eugene, Oregon. And that's a great experience.
I think
Toad,
Casey's done that.
You get in the glider, of course, and it's no wheels on it or anything. It's just a skid in it. There's a ski. And it's got a long tow rope to an airplane. And they rev up the airplane, and pretty soon, off you go. They took us up about, I guess, about 12,000 feet someplace in there. And I said, is there anything we should look for? And he said, one thing. He said, there's a horrible loud noise when I release you. He said, the release in the airplane, and I pull a rope in there, and that unsnaps the glider from the airplane. And he said, I go on, and then you guys start gliding. Well, boy, there is a hell of a noise when he hits it. And then on, it's just dead silence. And the guy that was flying the glider, a friend of mine, kept searching for air currents that are out there. Hell, you can go out there in a glider in Eugene, Oregon, where we were. You stay up for an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, and they can tell where these currents are coming. And they experiment around, you find a current, and it'll take you up and you can circle around. But the interesting thing is when you come into land, you got no wheels under you. You're sitting on your butt, about this far off the ground as you're coming. And that thing makes a noise. When you hit the grass, it skids along on your butt. But that's a nice experience. But the balloon, we had a great balloon ride. The balloon ride was very interesting.
Did you go up with me on that balloon? Mm-hmm. Yeah, we hardly went anywhere.
Were you on a balloon?
Wind. Yeah, we went up on a Remax hot air balloon, but there wasn't enough wind.
And it was a hot day, so they couldn't get the heat enough in the
Balloon?
to match the, because the hot air in the balloon is what lifts it, but it was such a hot day, we couldn't get a whole lot of lift. And
So we didn't go very far.
I remember one time we were on, what's that lake that's at Hoover Dam and
Lake
Columbus, that
Mead.
body of water up there?
Lake Mead.
Are you talking about Columbus?
I'm talking about Columbus.
Oh.
Yeah.
You're talking Hoover Dam.
One time, my golf course, and we were on a pontoon. I forget the club. Tom Lemon belonged to a club that had a clubhouse alongside that thing. And they had a pontoon boat that would accommodate about 8 people. And we were out there having a party one night about 6:30. And we hear some guy hollering at us. And we look at each other, none of us, I said, we look up in the air, here's this balloon floating across that lake. And the guy hollers down, how's it going down there? Something like that. We're tipping it. drinking beer, and he's floating over the lake at about 100 feet. But anyway, in Albuquerque, this was a fabulous experience. Albuquerque is the balloon capital of the world.
Yeah.
The currents there are incredible. Absolutely incredible.
They have that one festival a year where
Yeah.
hundreds go up at a time. It's
All right.
amazing. I would love to see that.
We're out there, and there are 100 balloons on that Sunday morning. We get out there about 6:30 in the morning, and they have them off the mesa. There's a big mesa with little steps that comes down like this, kind of toward the city of Albuquerque. And they started out with, they lay the balloons out in rows of 10. And there were probably, geez, I bet there were a dozen rows of 10 ahead of us. And they all go off about every 3 minutes. Off they go. So we've got the balloon laid out behind us. We've got the burner there. We've got the basket tipped over in the burner. And when they're about 10 or 12 balloons away from us, then they started heating the thing up, and got a big fan there blowing. Well, you know, blowing the heat in the thing. She starts to raise up. Finally she gets up there. And then it was our turn, and off we go. And the interesting thing was that the guy that had the balloon was a retired naval officer who had been in dirigibles in the Navy. And he had a balloon stable.
I say Derek.
He had like the 7-Up balloons. He represented about a half a dozen different companies that had balloons that they took to county fairs and state fairs all over the United States. And he had all the material to transport them to different places and so forth. So on this, Mary Jane is in the car in the station wagon. They were dragging a trailer. And Arizona or New Mexico and those states out there are all laid out in section lines like Nebraska is. Here, everything's square. Here in Tennessee, everything is all over depending on the mountains. But out there, of course, it's flat. And you go. So anyway, they're in the chase car. Do you have a chase car going off, following him?
There would have been, yeah. We didn't go far.
Yeah, we didn't need it.
enough, though. It didn't have to go anywhere.
I went to the next yard.
But we're up, I suppose, an hour and a half at least. And I thought it was interesting because it was Sunday morning. And I was amazed at how many people that had swimming pools, sunned, naked. Sun nude.
Mm-hmm.
We float over these people. The guys flying his balloon. We'd get over a swimming pool and there'd be some gal down there naked on her back, reading in the sun or something. And he'd holler, "Wow!" She looked around, cover up with a towel, look, and here's the balloon going over the top. And the cows, when they would turn the burner on, the thing is completely quiet, as you know. And then they turn the burner on. They go like that as they shoot the fire into the balloon. And you're going over a herd of cattle. They're out there with their head down, grazing away. And all of a sudden it's go this big noise like it. And they're looking around. Then they start running around in circles trying to figure out where that noise is coming from. But it was kind of rough when we came down because we had to clear a barbed wire fence and then get inside this place. And it bounced around a little. But we laid her down and climbed out of the basket. And then he says to me, "Now kneel down." When do I kneel? He said, "Kneel down." So I kneel down on one knee. He's behind me. And he reads the balloon prayer. Did they do this with you?
No.
The balloonist prayer. I've got it framed in there. About now you've examined the high currents of the earth and you appreciate God's view and blah, 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 blah. Then he gets to the end of the prayer and they pour champagne all over the top of his head. And then after they pour the champagne on you, then they pass the bottle around, everybody drinks it. In the meantime, here comes the chase car with the trailer, and it's a hell of a job folding up that balloon.
Yeah.
That basket is heavy.
Yeah.
And get that thing in the trailer behind the car and then go into town. And we had all kinds of pictures. But it was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen in my life because each one of the balloons was a different color, an individual color.
The pictures, I've seen the pictures of balloons taking pictures of other balloons that are up and from the ground, from the, up high and everything. It's amazing. It's like the most beautiful colored picture you could ever have. I mean, you literally have every color imaginable on when they send up those things, because it is, you got hundreds of those balloons, and the sky blue, and then the ground color. It is. I've seen pictures of that, and it's phenomenal. It's one of the things that I would like to do.
Well, the one we still need to do is, Chaz and I bought a thing to go on the Goodyear blimp. But on the certificate, the phone number that they used was changed. And so when we called it, they were like, well, yeah, this is Goodyear, but this is no longer that number, and they didn't know what the number was for.
So you had a ticket on us.
So we got an auction to a free ride on the Goodyear blimp, and we've never gotten it.
Couldn't find the blue, dude.
It's expired, but I think I've still held on to the certificate, figuring if we ever find who to talk to, explain to them the situation.
Say couldn't get through and everything like that, they'd give us some sympathy and say, yeah, come on over.
Well, we were on the Goodyear blimp in Florida. I forget the name of the town. It's a little town near Fort Lauderdale, where they keep the Goodyear blimp down there. And when I was president of the Navy League, one of the vice presidents of the Navy League was the vice president of Goodyear. And one day he asked me, he knew that we went to Florida a lot, and he said, you're down in that area where our blimp is. He said, would you like to take a ride on there? And I said, are you kidding? I would love to. And he said, oh, I can arrange it for you. He said, how many in your family down there? And I said, there'd be 6 of us. Oh, he said, perfect, because that's the number that goes. And he said, what time of the day would you like to go? And I said, well, what time do you think? He said, I'd take the last ride in the evening, just as the sun is setting, because he said 2 reasons. It's the best view, plus it's a half an hour longer than the other rides. They regularize about an hour, but he said they'll keep you up there about an hour and a half. So I took Johnny and Teresa and Eric and Kelly and Mary Jane and myself. And the beautiful part of it was that we went out over the ocean. It's on the ocean, the blue, the thing that they keep the balloon in. What they call it. Anyway, we went out over the ocean, and we went all the way up to Boca and saw our apartment from the balloon, circled around. It was a highlight of my thing. That's not on there, but that's one of the things that we did.
Yeah, I'd like to still do that. I think I mentioned it to somebody one time that was talking about Goodyear, and they said, "Oh, well, give us a call, and we'll, get you figured out." So.
But now they've got others, out there.
Oh, now, yeah, Goodyear's not the main one anymore. I mean, if you ask a kid, what's the main blimp provider, and they'd say MetLife. They'd say
MetLife. Yeah.
MetLife's at a lot of the events. And
Well, Goodyear has 5 of them, I think, around the country.
Yeah, I think in my commentary earlier, I told you when I was in the Air Force at Moffett Field. Moffett Field was a lighter-than-air airfield in the 30s and so forth, and they have a hangar up there. I was telling Doug, they have a hangar that is so big, clouds collect inside of the hangar, and it rains inside of the hangar, a light rain. And the doors are so huge that they're on railroad tracks with train engines that go across and open them. But the terrible thing about it was, every time we'd wreck an airplane would be wrecked, they'd bring the wreck in and pile it up in the pile in one corner of this hangar. And every morning when we marched to our airplane, you had to march right past that big pile of wrecked airplanes. And that got your attention, I'll tell you.
yeah, those blimp hangers.
But really there isn't, I guess anything that I ever wanted to do that I haven't, except parachute, I haven't ever parachuted. I've never been very keen on that. But this thing out here with that glider thing, when they're on top of it, is similar to being parachuted. But I've kind of lost my interest when I found out about those guys coming down on the road.
Yeah, I was supposed to, we had a group of people that were going to go parachuting, and 2 days before we were supposed to go, there was a person killed in Cincinnati, and everybody in my group decided not to go.
Chance
I still
of it.
wanted to go. I was like, what are
It's
the
like now's
odds?
probably the safest time.
Exactly.
I mean, everybody's gonna be more cautious and pack a little better, and
Everybody
Oh,
else,
one thing I didn't tell you on this, that you talked about parachuting. My investment club, you mentioned the investment club, my investment club, every year we had our meeting outside the United States. And this particular time we had our annual meeting in Acapulco. And we'd fish in the morning and then we'd do other things in the afternoon and the evening and so forth. And on this one particular day, in the morning, we had an incredible fishing. God, we'd have 2 or 3 sails on at the same time. We got into them and they were really hitting. But our problem was we started drinking early and we were drinking tequila Boilermakers. We started drinking tequila Boilermakers about 9 o'clock in the morning. We'd take a shot of tequila and then chase it with a couple of swallows of beer and so forth. We came in at 2 o'clock and they kept most of the sails, most of the fish that we caught, they kept because we'd go in and they'd sell them on the market. They'd sell them to the fish market, the guy that owned the boat. So as we're coming in, we're seeing these paragliders going out over the water. You know, the thing they're pulled by a boat and they got this long line and they're flying out there with this thing in a parachute. You're literally in a parachute. So we're looking at, hey, great deal. How do we get in there? And the guy said, well, as soon as we sell this fish, you get in a cab. And he said, go up to such and such a hotel. And they said, they're going off the beach up there. So we get the fish all sold, we get in the cab, and we get up there. We find the place. And there's a couple of Mexicans running. And they had a parachute. It was a World War II parachute. The hardware was all green, brass, and there was, the cloth was a little bit shredded and the lines were frayed and so forth. And as we had sobered up a little bit on this cab ride, and we sobered up a lot more when we saw this equipment we're going into. So instead of everybody jumping in, I want to be first, we were flipping and whoever lost went first. So we did the first flip and I lost, so I got to go first. So I get in this thing and it clips like a seat belt. They got all these things around you. And those clips didn't sound right. But anyway, the guy that's on the ground says, now you get up and he said, you go out over the water, you come back, and you come back by all the hotels, you run coming along the beach, you see in all the hotels, and then you see me down here, and I'm waving the flags, and when you see me waving the flag, you get the 2 shrouds, they had a ribbon on each one of the shrouds that you pull. He said, pull the shrouds that have the ribbon on, and you come down, and he said, I'll catch you. But he said, you can take a pretty hard bump on this if I miss you, but he said, I'll catch you. And I said, okay. So rev up the motor and you start running down the beach as fast as you can toward the water. It's on an incline like this. First thing you know, you're airborne and you start, and up you go, and you're about 100 feet up there, whatever it was. And I'm starting to enjoy the thing, so I think I'll sit back on my parachute harness, and they had forgotten to buckle the part I was sitting in. The only thing that's keeping me in that parachute is hanging on. I got no seat to sit in. I think, holy, I let go of this baby and I'd zoom right down into the water. But anyway, only thing I could do is hang on. So we're out over the water and we could probably go maybe 500 yards out over the water. Then we come in and we're coming by, this is about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and we're coming in and we're coming under about the 7th floor level of these resort hotels, and I'm looking in the windows, I'm enjoying this. And I see gals coming out of the showers after being out in the sun all day and so forth, and they're walking out and looking, and they don't worry about it, because who the hell is going to be peeking, they don't pull the drape, who's going to be peeking in your window on the 7th floor? And I'm flying by there, and I'm really enjoying this thing, and the next thing I can hear is yelling, Senor, Senor, and I look, and hell, he's back. I passed him by about 200 yards, okay, and here I am out, and I'm getting ready to go around again, because he can't stop, because I'm coming down hard, see. So I thought, boy, without a seat under me, I can't hang on for another one of these trips. I got to get down. So I pull the shrouds, and they dumps the parachute, and down I go. And I hit of course, the guy is clear back there 200 yards, and I hit the beach, and I bounce about 3 times, and I'm laying there. The wind is knocked out of me good. Here comes this good-looking Mexican gal with a string bikini on, carrying a little poodle in it. She looks at me and said, you're a little old for that shit, aren't you? Okay, now it's Lieber's turn. Keep in mind now we're about 200 yards farther down the beach than we should be to give him a good run. We're in our swoop, we got our swimming trunks on. Liebert gets in the damn thing, starts running down the beach. He doesn't have enough beach to get airborne. And he gets to the water, and the guy's dragging him through the water like he's skiing, and off come his swimming trunks.
Oh,
He
no.
just skied. Now he's going in the air stark naked. See him coming up. The gals look out the window at the 7th level of the hotel. Here's a naked guy floating by in a parachute.
Gosh.
So he goes all around. And boy, he couldn't wait to get out of that thing. And we never did find his swimming suit, of course. But he found his pants and put his pants. But
I wish I'd have noticed that story. I was just with his son at a wedding.
oh, really? Which one?
At Lee Schrader's, Bobby.
Oh, Bobby. Bobby's a great kid.
Yeah.
What are they doing with that golf course? Do you know they're?
I don't know. I didn't get a chance to talk to him.
Huh?
I didn't get a
They
chance.
sold that years ago.
Oh, did they?
Yeah.
Royal American Links.
Yeah, I don't remember what it was I played on.
Well, that's why they call it Royal American Links. RAL, Ralph A. Liebert.
Boy, there was one great guy. We had one of our conventions in Mexico City. We had rented a bus in Mexico City, and we were taking the bus. We had it exclusively, 14 of us, and we were taking this bus from Mexico to Acapulco, down the coast. And at that time, Mary Jane and I were visiting Johnny in Miami. And we were at this party the night that my plane was supposed to leave for Mexico City. So I leave the party about 10:30. The flight was going to leave at midnight, something like that. And I get out the airport, and I finally find the Mexican Airlines desk. And it's dark, but there's a little bell there. It said, ring the bell for it. So I ring the bell. Here comes this big old Mexican rolling out there. And I said, what time is the plane leaving for Mexico City? Oh, senor, don't you get the word? I said, get what word? She don't go until 2 o'clock. I said, I thought it was 12. No, he said, she don't go till 2 o'clock. She's held up in Venezuela. So now I'm trapped. It takes me an hour to get back to the party, and then back out here. It's almost 12 o'clock. I decide I have to stay there. So I get a Miami Herald, and I'm sitting on the counter. It gets to be 2 o'clock. I go out to the Mexican airline window. Dark, ring the bell. Oh, senor, don't you get the word? And I said, what word? She don't leave till 4. I said, what? Why wouldn't I get the word? I've been sitting right here in front of the... Oh, she won't leave. She won't leave till 4. That's from there. And I get on this Mexican airline at 4 o'clock in the morning, get into Mexico City, it's like 6 or whatever. Get in the cab, get to the hotel. I always stayed with Ralph Liebert. We always shared a room. So I get the key at the desk and get up to the room. Somebody in both beds. And I pull one back a little bit, and there's old Liebert's bald head. I pull the other one back. Here's the biggest, fattest, stinking old Mexican woman
Dad, you
you
should tell us.
ever saw in your life. And I shook Liebert, and I said, what the hell is going on here? And by that time, he's laying over there just roaring. He said, we ate at this restaurant, we were coming out of there, and he said, I looked in the kitchen, and I saw this dishwasher. This gal's washing dishes. And I thought, I'm going to put her in your bed, and you get here, you're going to be all fixed. I said, what'd you have to pay her? Never mind what I had to pay her. He says, get out of here and eat here, or whatever it was. Off she goes. Now I got the choice of either going to sleep in that bed she'd been in. So I called downstairs, and they came up and changed the sheets. And I went to sleep. And the first thing we were doing that Sunday morning was going to the opera in Mexico City, which starts at 10 o'clock, and it is incredible. Well, after I had the bed made up again, I get to bed, it's about 8 o'clock, so I get about an hour and a half sleep. And I get to one of the most beautiful operas I'd ever seen in my life. I'm there about 5 minutes, and I'm sound asleep, and he keeps nudging me and keeping me awake, but I missed about half of a fabulous Mexican opera, which is well known all over the world. So we get on the bus, Sunday afternoon. We've got a bar in there, we've got a bartender, we got the thing. Starting through Mexico City. We get about halfway through Mexico City, we stop in front of another hotel. 15 women get on. And the tour director there, I said, what the hell is going on here? I thought we had this bus for ourselves. No, we had to make other arrangements, and these ladies are, I said, who are they? Well, they're travel agents from the States, and they're down here on a convention, and they're going to go to Acapulco in the bus too. So there we are. They got the front 4, 5, 6 seats. We got the back 4, 5, 6. We've got our bar back there. Well, anyway, the relationship with a couple of the guys, one a prominent dentist in our investment club who lives in Columbus, still living as far as I know, he becomes quite attracted to one of the travel agents. At every stop we made, and we were going to stay because we stayed a night or two on the way down, he disappears. First thing in the morning, he's back there. Anyway, his wife heard about his activities on that trip, and they were divorced about 6 months later.
Oh, no.
But we got to Acapulco and had a great time. But we stopped at most 3 or 4 of the towns, and it took us 3 or 4 days to get down.
Mm-hmm.
We had some incredible experiences on that investment. We had some pretty big things going. I may have told you, we had the truck terminal that we bought. I don't know whether you were in on that or not. We had Johnny and Jacoby and a couple of guys. We were paying them by the hour to paint it. It needed to be painted. And they would work on Sundays when the trucks were in the bays, and they'd climb up the side of the truck and stand on the truck while they were painting the edge around the truck and everything. We didn't have any workers' compensation or anything. If one of them had fallen off, we'd have probably been individually liable or something. But that was a good group. Ralph Liebert came to Columbus, I may have told you this, from Cincinnati with a wife, 3 kids, a dog, a toolbox, and $100. He invented the IBM climate control room into which all the IBM equipment went all over the world. They couldn't make them fast enough out there. Ended up selling that place for $66 million to, what's the electric company that started?
Emerson.
Emerson Electric.
Bizarre.
And split that money, I think, 3 ways, his daughter and his 2 sons. His daughter was married to a Mexican guy that was a real nice guy. But Ralph Liebert was one of my closest friends. We've had so many good times together. Oh, one time, I may have told you this story. We're going to northern Canada fishing. And we took Ralph's private plane. And it seated, let's see, we must have been 4. There were either 4 or 6 of us in there, and a pilot and a co-pilot. And we've got a case of scotch. We leave Columbus, and we started drinking scotch. Somebody had to go at the head, and Ralph said, God, the head's not working. Hey guys, he calls the pilot, is that head working? We couldn't get it going before we left. We got no head in there, okay? So we're all sitting there. That's what we're going to do. So we finished that first bottle of scotch, and I said, hell, I'm going to pee in this bottle. So I just peed. One of the other guys said, that's good enough for me. He peed in the bottle. We're all peeing in these empty scotch bottles. We finished the 5th of scotch. We hand it around. Everybody pees in it. We open another bottle. So we get up to this isolated airport in northern Canada and land, and a Mountie comes out. And of course we get, he said, what do you have to declare and so forth. We had to get our licenses from him and so on. And I told the guy, I said, we don't have anything to declare. But I said, we got 5 scotch bottles full of pee. We drank everything we had all the way up there. Oh, he said, we're going to perform one of the funniest things you've ever seen. He said, when I confiscate booze coming in from the States, he said, I take it over and I throw it in a steel barrel at the corner of my shack over there. He had a little shack about the size of this room. And he said, the Indians know I'm doing that. And he said, a couple of them, he said, you wait a few minutes, and you'll see them come sneaking around the corner, and they'll reach in there and they grab that scotch and take off into the woods. and he said, give me those 5 bottles and act like I'm taking something from you very valuable. He said, perform a little thing here. And he says, I'll take them over and throw them in the can, and then I'll come back over here and we'll continue our argument. So as he's trying to take them, 3 or 4 of us grab a bottle trying to take it away from him, and we skirmish around there a little bit. See, he finally breaks loose, takes the 5 bottles over, throws them in this iron barrel, steel barrel, comes back over to the airplane, inside the airplane. We're standing there. Hell, it wasn't 5 minutes. Here comes this Indian sneaking around the corner. He reaches in that barrel, grabs a couple of those bottles, and off into the forest he goes. And the Mountie said, now wait about 5 minutes. We waited about 5 minutes. Ah! Wait! This guy, we could hear him screaming back there, dancing around.